The bridge of the TDS Valiant hummed with the quiet efficiency of a well-trained crew, going about their routine patrol duties in the outer sectors of human-controlled space. Captain Kyle Morrison sat in his command chair reviewing supply reports when the communications console erupted with an urgent beeping that immediately drew every eye on the bridge. Ensign Lisa Grant's fingers flew across her station as she isolated the signal, and her face went pale as she read the incoming transmission. Captain, we have a priority distress call coming from the Kepler 442 system, and it's using universal emergency codes. The young communications officer's voice carried a mix of excitement and concern that came from someone who had trained for this moment, but never expected to face it so soon. Morrison stood from his chair and walked to her station with measured steps that betrayed none of the sudden alertness coursing through his body. Put it on speakers, Grant, and let's hear what we're dealing with here. The bridge filled with static and garbled alien speech that the ship's computer struggled to translate in real time. Through the interference, a desperate voice pleaded for help, describing catastrophic engine failures and life support systems failing across a massive vessel, carrying hundreds of souls who would die without immediate rescue. Lieutenant Commander Amy Rhodes looked up from her tactical station with narrowed eyes that had seen too many combat situations to take anything at face value. Captain, I'm picking up the signal source and it's definitely coming from the coordinates they specified, but something feels off about the transmission patterns. She tapped her console, bringing up a holographic display that showed the signal's waveform and several anomalies that didn't match standard distress protocols used by known species. Commander Peter Hayes, the ship's first officer, moved to stand beside Morrison's chair and spoke in a low voice meant only for the captain. Sir, we're 3 days from the nearest fleet support, and if this is legitimate, we're the only ship in range to help. But if it's not, we could be walking into a situation without backup. Morrison nodded slowly, weighing the variables in his mind with the practiced ease of someone who had commanded starships for 15 years through peace and conflict alike. Dr. Henry Blake emerged from the turbolift, having heard the alert klaxons, and rushed to the bridge with his medical coat still unbuttoned. Captain, if there are truly hundreds of beings dying on that ship, we have a moral obligation to render aid regardless of the potential risks to ourselves. The doctor's idealism was well known throughout the fleet, and Morrison valued that perspective even when it conflicted with tactical prudence. Rhodes spoke up again, her voice carrying the professional skepticism that made her one of the best tactical officers in the fleet. Doctor, I appreciate the humanitarian angle, but these signal inconsistencies suggest the transmission might have been pre-recorded or artificially degraded to sound more desperate than the situation warrants. Morrison held up a hand to forestall the brewing debate between his officers, knowing that both perspectives held merit and required consideration. We're going to investigate, but we're doing it smart, and we're doing it careful. Hayes set course for those coordinates, best possible speed. Rhodes, I want shields up the moment we drop out of faster-than-light travel and all weapon systems hot, but not locked. Grant, keep that channel open and try to clean up the signal so we can get more information. Blake, get your medical teams ready for mass casualty receiving, but keep them in the medical bay until we know what we're dealing with. The crew responded with a chorus of affirmatives, and the Valiant's powerful engines thrummed to life as the ship changed course toward the distress signal. The journey took 6 hours, during which Grant managed to isolate several more details from the garbled transmission. The ship in distress belonged to the Zathran Concordat, a species that humanity had encountered only twice before in brief and largely unmemorable trade negotiations. The Zathran kept to themselves in a cluster of systems far from Earth's expanding sphere of influence, and little was known about their culture or military capabilities. Beyond basic diplomatic intelligence, Morrison spent those hours reviewing everything the ship's database contained about the Zathran, which amounted to frustratingly little concrete information. They were described as a warrior culture that valued strength and honor above most other traits, but beyond that, the records were sparse and largely speculative. Rhodes used the time to run combat simulations testing the Valiant's responses to various ambush scenarios, while Hayes coordinated with engineering to ensure all systems were operating at peak efficiency. As they approached the Kepler 442 system, the ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel with a shudder that ran through the deck plates. The view screen filled with the image of a massive alien vessel tumbling slowly in the void, with visible hull breaches venting atmosphere in frozen crystalline plumes that caught the distant starlight. The ship was easily twice the size of the Valiant and bore the angular, aggressive design aesthetic common to military vessels across the galaxy. Scans show approximately 800 life signs aboard that vessel, Captain, and I'm detecting power fluctuations consistent with a failing reactor. Rhodes read the data as it streamed across her displays, but her voice still carried that undercurrent of doubt that refused to fully accept the situation at face value. Morrison studied the alien ship through the view screen, noting the damage patterns and the way the vessel drifted without any apparent attempt at stabilization. "Hail them, Grant, and let's talk to whoever is in charge over there." The communications officer worked her console, and after a moment the view screen split to show a Zathran commander whose scaled features were contorted in what appeared to be genuine distress and fear. The alien's translator rendered his words in slightly accented English that the Valiant's crew could understand clearly. "Human vessel, thank the stars you responded to our call. I am Velcris, commander of this ship, and we are dying here. Our reactor suffered a cascade failure during a routine jump, and we have perhaps 4 hours before it explodes and takes my entire crew with it. We beg you please evacuate my people before it's too late." The alien's performance was compelling, with all the right notes of desperation and gratitude that one would expect from someone facing imminent death. Morrison studied Velcris carefully, looking for any sign of deception in those alien features, but finding it difficult to read emotions across species barriers. "We'll render whatever assistance we can, Commander, but I need to send a team over to assess the situation firsthand and determine the best way to proceed with evacuation procedures." Velcris nodded eagerly, perhaps too eagerly, and transmitted docking coordinates for the Valiant to send shuttles across. Rhodes leaned close to Morrison and whispered so only he could hear, "Sir, I really don't like this, and every instinct I have is screaming trap." Morrison nodded slightly, acknowledging her concern, while maintaining his diplomatic expression for the benefit of their audience. "I know, Rhodes, but we can't just leave them if there's any chance they're really in trouble. Prepare a boarding party and you'll lead it personally with full combat loadout under humanitarian cover. If anything goes wrong, I want you ready to fight your way out." The tactical officer nodded and left the bridge to gather her team while Morrison continued, coordinating with Velcris on the logistics of the rescue operation. Blake assembled his medical staff and prepared the cargo bays to receive potentially hundreds of alien refugees. Hayes took the command chair as Morrison moved between stations, overseeing every aspect of the operation with the careful attention of a commander who knew that one wrong move could doom his entire crew. The Valiant moved into position near the stricken Zathran vessel and launched 3 shuttles, carrying Rhodes and her boarding party of 20 Marines and engineers. As the small craft crossed the distance between the 2 ships, Morrison stood on his bridge, watching the operation unfold and hoping desperately that his caution was sufficient and his trust was not misplaced. The next few hours would determine whether they had just saved 800 lives or flown headlong into a trap that would test everything humanity had become among the stars. The shuttles crossed the empty space between the 2 vessels and docked with the Zathran ship through airlocks that opened with a hiss of equalizing pressure. Amy Rhodes stepped through first with her rifle held ready, and her helmet visor scanning the darkened corridor ahead with thermal and motion sensors that painted the alien interior in shades of green and red. Behind her came Sergeant Danny Cruz and 19 other Marines who moved with the practiced efficiency of soldiers who had trained for hostile boarding actions, even if none of them expected to use those skills on a rescue mission. The interior of the Zathran vessel was cold and dark, with only emergency lighting casting long shadows down corridors that stretched into the distance. Rhodes signaled her team to spread out into their assigned groups and begin moving toward their objectives, with Engineer Lisa Chen taking 5 Marines toward the engineering section to assess the reactor situation, while Danny Cruz led another squad toward what their scans indicated was the Life Support Control Center. Rhodes kept the remaining Marines with her and began moving deeper into the ship, following a route that should take them to the bridge where Velcris waited. "Something feels wrong about this place, Sergeant." One of the Marines, named Kelly, spoke quietly over the team's private communication channel. "The damage we're seeing looks surface level, like someone took a plasma cutter to the hull from the inside, rather than actual combat or system failure damage." Rhodes had noticed the same thing, and her unease grew with every step deeper into the alien vessel. "Stay alert and keep your weapons ready. But remember, we're here to help until someone proves otherwise." Rhodes kept her voice calm and professional, even as her instincts screamed warnings that she couldn't quite articulate. The team moved through several more corridors and past what should have been crew quarters, but the rooms were empty and showed no signs of recent habitation despite their scans, indicating hundreds of life signs somewhere on this. Ship crew's voice crackled over the communication system with an edge of concern that the veteran sergeant rarely displayed. "Commander, we've reached life support control, and these systems are running at 87% efficiency, which doesn't match the story we were told about failing systems. Also, I'm seeing weapons lockers that have been accessed recently with fresh maintenance logs dated from yesterday." Rhodes felt her stomach drop as the pieces began falling into place in a pattern she desperately wished she wasn't seeing. "All teams, this is Rhodes. We may have a situation here, so weapons free and watch your backs." She tried to open a channel back to the Valiant to report her findings, but encountered only static and jamming that cut her off from Morrison and the safety of her ship. Before she could issue further orders, the corridor lights blazed to full brightness and heavy bulkheads slammed down from the ceiling, separating her team into 3 isolated groups trapped in different sections of the ship, ambush positions now. Rhodes shouted as panels in the walls slid open and Zathran soldiers poured out with weapons firing. The Marines reacted with the speed born of countless training drills and formed a defensive circle, returning fire with their railguns that punched through the lighter Zathran armor with devastating effect. The aliens had numbers, but the humans had superior training and better equipment that gave them a fighting chance, despite being outnumbered and trapped. Back on the Valiant, Morrison watched his tactical display as Rhodes's signal went dark and the Zathran vessel's weapons began powering up with energy, signatures that no dying ship should be capable of generating. Before he could issue orders, the space around his ship rippled and 4 more Zathran warships decloaked from stealth systems that had hidden them perfectly until this moment. The enemy vessels formed an attack pattern around the Valiant with weapons locked and shields raised in a coordinated ambush that showed careful planning and execution. The view screen flickered and Velcris appeared again, but now his expression held no trace of desperation or gratitude and instead showed cold satisfaction and predatory confidence. "Captain Morrison, your ship is surrounded, and your boarding party is captured, and I suggest you surrender immediately, or I will begin executing your people one at a time, starting with that female commander who thought she could sneak weapons onto my vessel." The Zathran commander's voice carried the arrogance of someone who believed victory was already assured. Morrison felt rage burning in his chest, but kept his face carefully neutral and his voice steady. "Commander Velcris, you've made a serious mistake today and one that you're going to regret." The Zathran laughed at that response as if the human captain had told an amusing joke. "Your species is soft and weak, hiding behind diplomatic words and peaceful gestures, and my people have been raiding ships from lesser species for 2 years now, with perfect success. Your advanced technology will serve the Zathran Concordat well once we strip it from your broken vessel." Hayes moved close to Morrison and spoke quietly. "Sir, they have us in a perfect kill box, and with 4-to-1 odds, our chances of fighting out are minimal at best." Morrison nodded, but his mind was already racing through options and contingencies that he had hoped never to use. "Activate Protocol Omega and launch the electronic warfare drones. Tell engineering I want every ounce of power they can give me to engines and shields. We're not surrendering and we're not leaving our people behind." The Valiant shuddered as missile launchers opened and released a swarm of small drones that scattered in every direction, filling space with jamming signals and false sensor returns that confused the Zathran targeting systems. Morrison gripped his command chair as the enemy ships opened fire, and the Valiant's shields flared bright with absorbed energy. Hayes threw the ship into a sharp roll that brought them around one of the enemy vessels, using it as a shield against the others while the Valiant's own weapons began returning fire with deadly accuracy. Deep inside the Zathran mothership, Rhodes and her Marines fought their way through corridors against waves of enemy soldiers who kept coming in greater numbers. Danny Cruz had managed to blast through a bulkhead and rejoin Rhodes's group, doubling their fighting strength, but they were still cut off from Lisa Chen and her engineers, who were trapped somewhere in the bowels of the ship. Rhodes made a quick decision based on her knowledge of ship layouts and began leading her combined force not toward an escape route but deeper into the enemy vessel, toward what she hoped was the command center. Lisa Chen and her small team had barricaded themselves in the Zathran engineering section, and she worked frantically at an alien console. While her Marine escorts held the doorway against attacking soldiers, the engineer's fingers flew across the controls as she worked to understand the Zathran systems and find any weakness she could exploit. These aliens had made the mistake of using fairly standard galactic technology with only minor variations, and Chen had trained on dozens of alien systems. During her time in the fleet, I'm into their network and uploading a virus that should cause some serious problems for them. Chen spoke calmly despite the weapons fire that filled the air around her position. The Marines threw grenades that sent Zathran soldiers scrambling for cover and bought her the precious seconds she needed to complete her work. The virus was a masterpiece of human cyber warfare designed to spread through connected systems and cause cascading failures that would cripple a ship's ability to fight back. In space, the Valiant danced between enemy vessels with maneuvers that the Zathran could not match. Morrison had commanded this ship for 3 years and knew every trick she could perform, including several that weren't in any manual. The human vessel's artificial intelligence-assisted targeting systems achieved hit rates that seemed impossible to the enemy, as railgun rounds and missiles found their marks with devastating precision. One Zathran warship broke off from the attack pattern, trailing atmosphere from multiple hull breaches and desperately trying to maintain structural integrity. Hayes coordinated with the weapons officers and engineering to maximize their effectiveness against superior numbers. "Sir, if we can take out one more of their ships, we might be able to break through their formation and put some distance between us." Morrison shook his head at that suggestion. "We're not running anywhere until we get our people back, and these Zathran are about to learn why you don't corner a human ship." Inside the mothership, Rhodes and her team burst through the final door into the command center and began fighting at close quarters, with the Zathran command staff who had not expected to see enemy soldiers penetrate this deep into their vessel. Danny Cruz moved with brutal efficiency, dropping 3 enemies in as many seconds, while Rhodes made straight for Velcris, who stood at his command station with shock written across his alien features. She slammed into him hard enough to send them both crashing to the deck and pressed her sidearm against his head while shouting for his soldiers to stand down. "Call off your ships right now, or I will paint this bridge with whatever color your blood happens to be." Rhodes kept her voice cold and professional despite her racing heartbeat and the adrenaline singing through her veins. Velcris stared at her with genuine confusion that this female human had not only escaped his trap, but had turned it around and captured him on his own bridge. His cultural programming could not process the situation fast enough to formulate a response. Velcris stared up at Amy Rhodes with something approaching disbelief in his alien eyes, as the reality of his situation became impossible to deny. The human female he had dismissed as unimportant now held complete control over his life and his ship, while her soldiers secured the command center with ruthless efficiency that spoke of training far beyond what the Zathran had anticipated. Rhodes kept her weapon steady and her voice carried across the bridge with absolute authority that left no room for negotiation or delay. "You have exactly 10 seconds to transmit the order for your ships to stand down and cease their attack on the Valiant, or I will kill you and work my way through your command staff until someone agrees to cooperate." Velcris opened his mouth to refuse and saw something in the human's eyes that made him reconsider, because whatever he had expected from these supposed soft diplomatic species was not present in the cold determination staring back at him. He reached slowly for his command console and began entering commands while Danny Cruz watched him carefully, ready to shoot at the first sign of treachery. The transmission went out to the 3 remaining Zathran warships, ordering them to break off their attack and withdraw to a safe distance. Morrison saw the enemy vessels hesitate and then begin backing away from the Valiant with their weapons powering down, though their shields remained active. Hayes looked at his captain with confusion evident in his expression, but Morrison smiled slightly, having recognized what must have happened aboard the enemy mothership. "Our people just captured their command center and turned this whole situation around on them. Sir, the enemy mothership is experiencing massive system failures across all decks, and I'm reading power fluctuations that suggest someone is wreaking havoc with their primary systems." The tactical officer's report confirmed Morrison's suspicions, and he felt pride swelling in his chest for his crew who had refused to accept defeat, even when trapped and outnumbered. "Hayes, send a message to Commander Rhodes and tell her well done, but we need to extract them before that mothership becomes completely unstable." Rhodes received Morrison's transmission and acknowledged it before turning her attention back to Velcris, who sat on the deck, with his hands secured behind his back by human restraints. Your self-destruct system, is it still functional, or did my engineer's virus disable that too? Velcris glared at her with hatred burning in his eyes and nodded toward a control panel on the far side of the bridge. I activated it before your virus took full effect, and you have 4 minutes to evacuate before the ship tears itself apart and takes everyone aboard with it. Danny Cruz swore colorfully and began organizing the Marines to move toward the hangar bay, but Rhodes held up her hand to stop him. How many of your crew are still aboard this vessel? Velcris laughed bitterly at the question, finding dark humor in the situation. Almost 800, as we told you originally, though most of them are soldiers, waiting in ambush positions throughout the ship. And why do you care when they tried to kill you? Rhodes made a decision that went against every tactical instinct, but aligned perfectly with the values that humanity claimed to hold, even in the darkest circumstances. Because unlike you, we don't leave people to die when we can save them, even if they're enemies who just tried to kill us. She opened her communication channel to all human forces on the ship. All teams, this vessel is set to self-destruct in less than 4 minutes, and we're evacuating everyone we can, including the Zathran crew, so start stunning hostiles and dragging them to the shuttles now. The Marines looked at each other with expressions that mixed disbelief and understanding before they began moving through the ship, using their stun weapons on Zathran soldiers who, moments before, had been trying to kill them. Danny Cruz personally stunned 6 enemies and threw them over his shoulders, carrying them toward the hangar while other Marines did the same. Lisa Chen abandoned her position in engineering after setting the reactor to a controlled shutdown that might buy them extra seconds, and ran toward the evacuation point with her team carrying unconscious Zathran they encountered along the way. Morrison watched from the Valiant as his shuttles began making emergency launches from the Zathran mothership, loaded far beyond their safe capacity with both human and alien personnel. Hayes coordinated with the shuttle pilots, guiding them back to the Valiant through the debris field while keeping sensors locked on the 3 enemy warships that remained at a distance but could still pose a threat if they decided to resume hostilities. The captain ordered all hangar bays opened and medical teams standing by to receive what would be a chaotic flood of personnel requiring immediate attention. Rhodes dragged Velcris to his feet and shoved him toward the exit while her team swept the command center one last time, looking for any Zathran who might be hiding or injured. She counted seconds in her head, knowing they had perhaps 90 remaining before the ship exploded, and wondering if they had bitten off more than they could handle with this rescue attempt. The corridors filled with running figures, both human and alien, as the evacuation became a desperate race against time and structural integrity that groaned under the stress of failing systems. The last shuttle lifted off from the Zathran hangar with humans hanging from exterior handholds because there was no more room inside the passenger compartment. Rhodes sat in the pilot's seat with Velcris secured beside her and watched through the viewport as the mothership began breaking apart with internal explosions that sent debris spinning into space. The shuttle's engines screamed at maximum power as she pushed them beyond safe limits, trying to reach the Valiant before the shockwave from the main explosion could catch them. Morrison gripped his command chair as he watched the final shuttle racing toward his ship, with destruction chasing close behind. Hayes had already ordered the Valiant to begin moving forward, closing the distance to give the shuttle a better chance of reaching safety. The mothership's reactor finally breached in a blinding flash of light and energy that expanded outward in a sphere of destruction that vaporized everything in its immediate radius. The shuttle hit the Valiant's hangar bay at full speed, with Rhodes barely managing to engage the emergency crash barriers before they slammed into the back wall hard enough to deploy every safety system on board. The hangar bay doors sealed shut just as the shockwave hit the Valiant, rocking the massive warship and causing alarms to blare across every deck. Morrison waited for damage reports while medical teams rushed into the hangars to begin treating the wounded from both sides, who now filled the Valiant beyond its normal capacity. Dr. Henry Blake found himself overwhelmed with patients and began organizing triage teams to separate the critically wounded from those who could wait. Human and Zathran medics worked side by side under his direction, treating injuries without regard for which species the patient belonged to, because in his medical bay, everyone received the same level of care. Blake personally stabilized a Zathran soldier who had suffered severe burns and then moved immediately to a human marine with a broken leg without pausing to consider the irony of saving the life of someone who had tried to kill his shipmates or Rhodes, climbed out of the crashed shuttle and took stock of her people, counting heads and checking for serious injuries with relief flooding through her when she realized they had not lost a single Marine despite the intensity of the fighting. Danny Cruz appeared beside her with soot covering his face and a grin that showed all his teeth. "Ma'am, that was either the bravest or the craziest thing I've ever seen us do, and I'm not sure which." Morrison arrived in the hangar bay and looked at the scene of controlled chaos with hundreds of Zathran prisoners being secured and treated alongside his own wounded crew. Rhodes saluted as he approached and gave her report in clipped professional tones that concealed the exhaustion threatening to overwhelm her. "All human personnel accounted for, sir, with 14 wounded but none critically, and we managed to evacuate approximately 200 Zathran from their vessel before it exploded." The captain returned her salute and allowed himself a small smile. "You turned an ambush into a rescue operation, Commander, and I'd say that's a pretty good day's work." He looked at Velcris, who sat on the deck with human guards watching him closely. "As for you and your people, you're all now prisoners of war, and you'll be treated according to the conventions that civilized species follow, even if you don't recognize them yourselves." Hayes appeared with a communication tablet and his expression serious. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission from Earth Command, and they want a full report on what happened here, along with our recommendations for how to proceed. They've also dispatched a battle fleet to this location with Admiral Christine Walsh in command, and they should arrive in approximately 30 hours. Morrison nodded and gestured for his senior officers to follow him to a quiet corner of the hangar where they could speak privately. "The galaxy is going to hear about what happened here today, and we need to make sure they understand the right message. The Zathran thought they could prey on humanity because we choose diplomacy over aggression, but they learned the hard way that our kindness is a choice, not a weakness." He looked at the wounded being treated and the prisoners being secured. "We came here to rescue people, and that's exactly what we did, even though it meant fighting our way through an ambush." The next 30 hours passed in a blur of activity as the crew of the Valiant worked to secure their prisoners and tend to the wounded while maintaining combat readiness, in case the 3 remaining Zathran warships decided to resume hostilities. Morrison had the ship move to a defensive position with clear lines of fire to all potential threats, and he doubled the watch rotation to ensure his exhausted crew could get some rest without compromising security. Dr. Blake and his medical team worked without stopping to stabilize the most critically injured patients from both species and found to their relief that Zathran physiology responded well to many standard human medical treatments, with only minor adjustments needed. Velcris sat in the brig behind a force field that hummed with energy and stared at the bulkhead with an expression that his guards could not read. The Zathran commander had not spoken since being locked away, and seemed lost in thoughts that consumed his attention completely. Morrison decided it was time to have a conversation with his prisoner and walked down to the detention area with Hayes accompanying him as a witness to whatever might be discussed. The force field deactivated and Morrison entered the cell, while Hayes remained outside with a hand near his sidearm. Velcris looked up at the human captain and something like curiosity flickered across his alien features. "You should have let me die on my ship, Captain, and saved yourself the burden of feeding and guarding prisoners who tried to kill your crew." Morrison sat down on the bench across from Velcris and met his gaze steadily. "We don't abandon people to die when we can save them, and that applies to everyone regardless of whether they're friends or enemies." Velcris shook his head as if trying to understand a concept that made no logical sense in his worldview. In Zathran culture, defeated enemies are either killed in battle or enslaved if they surrender, and mercy toward warriors is considered an insult because it suggests they were not worthy opponents. You humans confuse me greatly because you fight with the ferocity of apex predators but then extend compassion to those you defeat, and I cannot reconcile these contradictory behaviors. Morrison considered his response, carefully knowing that this conversation might shape how the Zathran viewed humanity going forward. "We're not contradictory, Commander. We're just complicated and capable of holding multiple values simultaneously. We can be fierce warriors when necessary and compassionate healers when the fighting stops. The question isn't about which one is our true nature because both are equally real. The question is about which one we choose to express in any given moment." The Zathran commander absorbed these words and seemed to wrestle with their implications. "My people have raided 17 vessels from 6 different species over the past 2 years, and we captured technology and enslaved crews without mercy because we believed strength was the only currency that mattered in the galaxy. Your species was targeted specifically because your recent technological advances made you valuable prey, and our intelligence suggested you were weak because you preferred diplomacy to warfare. Morrison felt anger rising in his chest but kept his voice level. How many people died because of these raids? Velcris met his eyes without flinching. Hundreds across all the attacks combined, and we saw them as acceptable losses in pursuit of our strategic goals. Morrison stood and walked to the force field, looking out at the corridor beyond. You made a fundamental miscalculation, Commander, and mistook our preference for peace as an inability to wage war. Now you and your people will face the consequences of that mistake. The captain left the brig and returned to the bridge, where activity continued at a controlled pace as the crew monitored the remaining Zathran vessels and awaited the arrival of Earth's battle fleet. Lisa Chen had been analyzing the data recovered from the Zathran mothership before its destruction, and she presented her findings to Morrison with a grim expression. Captain, the Zathran have been systematically targeting isolated vessels, and their tactics show increasing sophistication with each raid, and if we hadn't stopped them here, they would have continued this pattern indefinitely. Hayes pulled up a holographic display showing the locations of all 17 raids, and the pattern suggested careful planning rather than random opportunism. They've been operating in a specific region of space that lacks strong central authority, and their government has been sanctioning these operations as a way to acquire technology without the expense of research and development. Morrison studied the data and recognized the implications immediately. This wasn't the action of rogue pirates, but rather state-sponsored piracy on a scale that threatened the stability of multiple species. The sensor officer called out suddenly, "Captain, I'm detecting multiple faster-than-light signatures incoming, and they match the profile of Terran Defense Fleet vessels." Morrison felt relief wash over him as Admiral Christine Walsh's battle fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel in a coordinated formation that spoke of decades of training and discipline. 40 warships appeared on the tactical display, arrayed in a battle formation that could bring devastating firepower to bear on any threat, and Morrison noted with satisfaction that the 3 remaining Zathran vessels immediately powered down all weapons and began broadcasting surrender signals. Admiral Walsh appeared on the main view screen, with her command presence filling the bridge despite being transmitted from her flagship kilometers away. "Captain Morrison, I've read your preliminary report, and I want to say well done to you and your crew for handling an extremely difficult situation with both skill and integrity." Morrison stood and saluted his superior officer. "Thank you, Admiral, and we're ready to transfer prisoners and provide detailed debriefs on everything that occurred here." The Admiral's expression hardened as she continued. "Earth Command has issued an ultimatum to the Zathran Concordat, and they have 72 hours to return all captured personnel and technology from their previous raids, provide full reparations to affected species, and submit to oversight of their military operations. If they refuse, we will consider it an act of war and respond accordingly." Morrison felt a grim satisfaction at hearing this, because the Zathran needed to understand that their actions carried consequences that extended beyond a single failed ambush. Over the next several hours, shuttles moved between the Valiant and Admiral Walsh's flagship, transferring prisoners and evidence, while Morrison and his senior officers prepared detailed reports on every aspect of the engagement. Rhodes found herself commended personally by the Admiral for her actions aboard the Zathran mothership, and told that she was being promoted to full commander, effective immediately. Danny Cruz and Lisa Chen both received medals for valor, and the entire boarding party was recognized for their exceptional performance under impossible circumstances. Dr. Blake presented his medical findings to the fleet's chief surgeon and noted that despite the intensity of the fighting, only 7 human Marines had been killed, while Zathran casualties numbered in the dozens due to the superior training and equipment of Earth's military forces. The doctor also reported that many Zathran prisoners had expressed confusion and grudging respect for the humans who had saved them from their own commander's self-destruct sequence, and several had asked to speak with Morrison personally to understand human motivations better. The 3 remaining Zathran warships were boarded and secured by Admiral Walsh's Marines, who found extensive evidence of previous raids, including stolen technology and personal effects from multiple species. The intelligence gathered would prove invaluable in tracking down other victims and returning stolen property, while also providing diplomatic leverage in future negotiations with the Zathran government. Morrison watched as the enemy vessels were taken into custody and felt satisfaction knowing that this particular threat had been neutralized permanently. News of the battle spread through the galactic community with remarkable speed as species who had suffered under Zathran raids learned that humanity had not only defeated the raiders but had done so while adhering to ethical standards that many considered idealistic to the point of foolishness. Diplomatic channels lit up with requests for meetings and trade negotiations as civilizations that had been wary of the aggressive newcomer species suddenly saw Earth as a potential ally worth cultivating. Morrison received messages from governments thanking humanity for striking a blow against piracy and offering various forms of cooperation and support. Admiral Walsh called Morrison to a private conference, and her expression was serious. Captain, what happened here is going to reshape humanity's role in the galaxy, and Earth Command wants to build on this momentum by establishing a mutual defense initiative where we offer protection to species threatened by predatory powers. You and your crew have shown the galaxy that humans are capable warriors who fight with honor, and that combination is exactly what smaller civilizations need to feel safe from larger aggressive neighbors. Morrison considered the implications of such an initiative and recognized both the opportunities and the burdens it would create. Admiral, with respect, that's a significant commitment and one that will require substantial resources and could draw us into conflicts that don't directly threaten Earth's interests. Walsh nodded in agreement. I know, Captain, but the alternative is allowing species like the Zathran to continue preying on T. The Zathran Concordate's response to Earth's ultimatum arrived exactly 68 hours after Admiral Walsh had issued her demands, and the tone of their message surprised many observers who had expected defiance or military posturing from a species with such an aggressive reputation. The Zathran leadership announced their complete acceptance of all terms, including the return of stolen technology and captured personnel, along with substantial reparations to be paid to all affected species over a period of 10 standard years. They also agreed to allow human observers to monitor their military operations and ensure compliance with galactic norms regarding warfare and territorial expansion. Morrison stood on the bridge of the Valiant and listened to the Zathran transmission, with mixed feelings of satisfaction and wariness, because he understood that such a dramatic reversal of policy suggested fear rather than genuine reform. Admiral Walsh appeared on the view screen moments after the Zathran message concluded, and her expression showed careful satisfaction, tempered by professional skepticism. Captain, the Zathran analyzed the tactical data from your engagement and realized their technology is inferior in every category that matters, and they've concluded that a war with humanity would result in their complete defeat. The captain nodded slowly as he absorbed this information. So they're surrendering because they have no choice rather than because they've learned any moral lessons about preying on weaker species. Walsh smiled grimly at his assessment. Exactly, right, Captain. And that means we'll need to maintain pressure and oversight indefinitely to ensure they don't backslide once they think we're not watching anymore. She paused before continuing. Earth Command wants you to accompany the delegation that will oversee the prisoner exchange and technology returns on the Zathran homeworld, and your presence will send a clear message about humanity's resolve. 3 days later, Morrison found himself aboard a shuttle descending through the atmosphere of the Zathran homeworld, with Rhodes and Hayes accompanying him as representatives of the crew who had actually fought and defeated the Zathran ambush. The planet below was heavily industrialized, with massive cities covering significant portions of the continents and orbital facilities that suggested a civilization with substantial manufacturing capacity and technological sophistication. What they lacked in innovation they had apparently compensated for through aggressive acquisition of other species' advances. The Zathran government had arranged an official ceremony in their capital city, where they would formally return the stolen items and personnel to representatives from the 6 species they had victimized over the past 2 years. Morrison watched as Zathran officials brought forth crates of technology and led groups of freed captives onto a raised platform where ambassadors from their home species waited to receive them. The humans who had been captured from a science vessel 8 months earlier wept openly as they were reunited with Earth's diplomatic team, and Morrison felt anger burning in his chest at the thought of what they must have endured. Velcris stood, in chains on the platform alongside the other Zathran commanders who had led raiding operations, and Morrison noticed that the alien who had tried to ambush the Valiant looked diminished somehow, as if defeat had broken something fundamental in his spirit. The Zathran Prime Minister approached Morrison with what their translators suggested was a deferential posture, and spoke in formal tones that carried across the assembled crowd. "Captain Morrison, on behalf of the Zathran people, I offer our sincere apologies for the actions our military forces took against your vessel, and the vessels of other species represented here today." Morrison studied the Prime Minister carefully, looking for signs of genuine remorse, but finding only the calculated expressions of a politician managing a crisis. "Your apology is noted, Prime Minister, but words alone cannot undo the harm your people caused through their systematic predation on peaceful vessels." The Zathran leader nodded as if expecting this response. "We understand, Captain, and that is why we have agreed to all terms demanded by your government, including oversight and reparations, and we hope that in time we can demonstrate through our actions that we have learned from this grave mistake." The ceremony continued for another hour, with speeches from various ambassadors and officials before Morrison was given an opportunity to address the assembled crowd. He stepped forward to the podium and looked out at thousands of Zathran citizens who had gathered to witness this historic moment of their species' humiliation. "The galaxy watched your people attack a ship that responded to your false distress call, and they saw what happened when you mistook humanity's preference for peace as an inability to wage war." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "You learned that humans will come when called to render aid, but you also learned that we will fight with overwhelming force when threatened, and we will not forget those who choose treachery over honor." Morrison's speech was transmitted across the galaxy through various news networks and diplomatic channels, and within hours it became one of the most widely shared pieces of media in recent galactic history. Political analysts debated the implications of humanity's newfound assertiveness, while military strategists studied the tactical data from the Valiant's engagement with renewed interest. Species that had previously viewed humans as insignificant, newcomers suddenly reassessed their diplomatic positions, and several governments that had been considering aggressive actions against their neighbors quietly shelved those plans. The prisoner exchange completed, and Morrison returned to the Valiant, where his crew greeted him with obvious relief at having their captain back safely. Dr. Blake reported that all rescued human captives were in stable condition and would recover fully with proper care and counseling. Lisa Chen had finished analyzing all the recovered technology and confirmed that the Zathran had indeed stolen significant innovations from multiple species, including some items that had been classified as military secrets by their original owners. Admiral Walsh summoned Morrison to a secure channel communication 2 days after the ceremony, and her expression showed genuine pride mixed with strategic calculation. "Captain, your speech on the Zathran homeworld has resonated across the galaxy in ways we didn't anticipate, and we've received requests for mutual defense agreements from 23 different civilizations in just the past 48 hours. Earth Command has authorized me to begin negotiations for what we're calling the Galactic Protection Initiative, and you're being reassigned to serve as military liaison for this new organization." Morrison felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders as he understood what was being asked of him. "Admiral, with respect, I'm a ship captain, not a diplomat, and I'm not sure I'm the right person for this role." Walsh shook her head at his objection. "You're exactly the right person, Captain, because you've demonstrated the precise combination of military competence and ethical behavior that defines what we want this initiative to represent, and the species signing these agreements aren't looking for diplomats. They're looking for warriors they can trust." The next 6 months transformed Morrison's life as he traveled between systems, negotiating agreements and establishing protocols for the new initiative. The Valiant became a symbol of humanity's commitment to protecting peaceful species from aggressive predators, and whenever the ship arrived in a system, populations would gather to see the vessel that had turned a Zathran ambush into a funeral for their would-be killers. Rhodes took command of the ship for routine operations, while Morrison focused on the diplomatic and strategic aspects of building an organization that could actually deliver on its promises. The Zathran, meanwhile, struggled to adapt to their new, reality as a species under permanent oversight, and subject to restrictions on their military expansion. Their economy suffered as trade partners who had feared them before now felt emboldened to demand better terms, and their government faced internal challenges from factions that resented the humiliation of submitting to human authority. Velcris remained imprisoned on Earth awaiting trial for his role in the raids, and his case became a test of how humanity would balance justice with mercy when dealing with defeated enemies. Morrison visited Velcris one final time before the trial began, and found the Zathran commander substantially changed from the arrogant predator who had launched the ambush months earlier. The alien looked up as Morrison entered his cell and spoke, in a quiet voice that carried none of his former bravado. "Captain, I have been studying human history during my imprisonment, and I discovered something that troubles me greatly." Morrison sat down and gestured for Velcris to continue. "Your species has a long history of warfare and conflict among yourselves, yet you developed ethical frameworks that constrained how you fought and protected those who could not fight. And I realize now that these constraints were not weaknesses, but rather the foundation of your strength." The Zathran commander leaned forward with an intensity that suggested genuine intellectual struggle. "My people saw strength as the only virtue that mattered, and we believed compassion was a luxury for species that lacked the courage to take what they wanted by force, and now I understand we were wrong, because true strength includes the discipline to choose restraint when you have the power to destroy." Morrison nodded slowly. "Your B.